In today's video, I want to talk about where the trash we throw into the black bin goes, and usually it's a landfill. I want to share a story actually. So a few weeks ago, I couldn't find my AirPods anywhere at home. So I used the Find My feature on my phone to locate them, and they were actually in a location that I have never been to before. I zoomed in and the location showed Republic Services, which is our local waste management company. And then I looked up the address, and to my surprise, it was a landfill. My hypothesis is that when I left them on the kitchen island, our cat, who loves playing with AirPods, must have knocked them off the kitchen counter and, incidentally, into the recycling bin. So you may be wondering, if they were pushed into the recycling bin, how come they ended up in the landfill? If you've seen my previous video, you may remember that the hauler comes and takes everything from your blue bin and brings it to a MRF, which is a materials recovery facility. There, workers and machines would sort through all of your recycling, pulling out what they can sell. Usually clean cardboard, aluminum cans, and some plastics. The rest, all that is contaminated or unsellable, go to the black bin stream. Depending on local infrastructure, that waste either goes to an incinerator or a landfill. In the US, most go to landfills. There are about 76 incinerators operating in the US, but about 2,600 landfills. The choice between a landfill or incinerator also depends a lot on geography and land availability. For example, in the US, where there's a lot of land, landfilling remains the cheapest option, averaging about $55 per ton. But in countries with limited space, like Japan or Singapore, landfilling isn't a viable option. So most of that waste is burned in incinerators or actually shipped overseas. When I told my story about my AirPods in the landfill to others, they asked if I could go find them or if I found them yet. Like that guy who lost a hard drive with $800 million worth of Bitcoin and who is still searching for it. I thought this question was really interesting because it could be commonly believed that landfills are these huge open sites with people scavenging through mounds of waste. Those are actually very different from the modern engineered landfills in developed countries. Let's dive into modern landfills 101. Firstly, landfills are designed to contain waste instead of letting it decompose naturally, mainly to isolate them from the environment for as long as possible. Landfills are highly regulated in developed countries because of the huge environmental risk if anything leaks out. So, what needs to be built before a landfill can even operate? Firstly, a proper landfill has multiple layers and systems. First, it has a liner system, usually a combination of thick plastic made of high-density polyethylene and compacted clay as a way to stop the waste and liquid from seeping into the soil and the groundwater. Next is a leachate collection system, which is a network of pipes that collects contaminated water that is formed as the waste breaks down. This toxic soup is then pumped out and treated at wastewater facilities. Next is a gas collection system because food and organic materials inside landfills decompose without oxygen, and this produces methane gas. Gas vents prevent explosions, and groundwater should be monitored regularly. The next layer is a daily cover material. So each day, layers of soil or tarps are placed on top of the new waste to reduce odors, pests, and also fire risk. One landfill can typically be used for about 30 to 50 years, depending on the amount of waste being sent daily, as well as the size of the landfill. When a landfill reaches capacity, it's sealed with at least 2 feet or 60 centimeters of soil, plastic, and topsoil before being landscaped. Even then, closed landfills require decades of monitoring because liners eventually crack, pipes clog, and methane continues to leak. If the leachate, the bad water, escapes, it can actually contaminate rivers and groundwater with heavy metals, pesticides, and microplastics, all things that are nearly impossible to clean once they spread underground. Come with me, I want to show you something pretty crazy here. Where I'm standing right now, after just walking a few minutes from my home in Richmond, California, is the site of a previous landfill. So what's crazy about this landfill is that it was only discovered a few years ago that a large chemical company, Stauffer Chemical, had actually illegally dumped 25,000 tons of pesticides, radioactive waste into the landfills all around the Bay Area. This happened between 1960s to 1970s, so about 50 years ago. Even though the sites have been sealed up and officially closed for many years, residents are still deeply concerned about contamination and health risk. It's a reminder that once toxic materials enter a landfill, they don't just disappear. They stay buried, sometimes quietly threatening the environment and nearby communities for generations. Now, moving on to food waste in landfill. Some people may think that once food waste is in the landfill, it will eventually break down into soil. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Landfills are anaerobic environments, meaning there's no oxygen for microbes to break down food. Instead of turning into compost like it normally would in aerobic environments, food releases methane gases as it rots underground. And methane is extremely flammable, and this makes landfills very dangerous. On top of this, methane is a potent greenhouse gas. According to the EPA, landfills are actually responsible for about 15% of all US methane emissions. When we toss food scraps into the black bin, we're not really letting them return to Earth. We're turning them into greenhouse gases instead. That's why separating food and yard waste into the green bin makes such a big difference. Composting facilities are designed for oxygen-based decomposition, turning food scraps into nutrient-rich soil that improves soil health and locks carbon away. And it matters because food and yard waste makes up roughly 15% of what ends up into the black bins. Redirecting that to green bins can significantly reduce methane emissions and landfill volume. Now that we know how landfills are engineered and can be highly explosive and toxic to the environment, I wonder how the guy searching for his Bitcoin hard drive was planning to find it. As a matter of fact, he's been offering the city in Newport, Wales, £200 million to buy that landfill and wanted to dig through it. But not surprisingly, the city refuses because reopening a landfill risks releasing methane, leachate, and toxic dust into the air. It's just that dangerous. So, like my AirPods, his hard drive will stay buried forever. Now, let's come back to these open dump fields that we often see in videos with mountains of trash piled up. The distinction is that these are not the modern landfills we have the privilege of having. They're open dumps, mostly found in developing countries. And the sad thing is that a lot of that trash doesn't even come from there. It's mostly shipped illegally from wealthier nations. This type of illegal waste shipping has existed for many years, starting from the 1980s, and has been coined waste colonialism. Waste colonialism is the practice of developed countries exporting their waste, primarily plastics and electronics, to less developed countries, shifting the environmental and health burdens to communities that lack the infrastructure to manage it safely. In 1989, the Basel Convention was established by the United Nations to prevent this from happening by controlling how the hazardous waste is moved between the countries. On one hand, it has indeed improved transparency and accountabilities because countries now have to agree before receiving foreign waste. But loopholes remain. Plastic exports labeled as recyclables can still legally be shipped, even if most of it ends up burned or dumped. Also, not all countries have agreed to the Basel Convention. For example, the US, which creates an opportunity to still illegally export waste. After China stopped taking foreign plastic waste in 2018, shipments from developed countries shifted to Southeast Asia, countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and this is often overwhelming on their waste system. Some ports actually receive hundreds of containers a day filled with contaminated plastic waste that could contain unknown hazardous materials disguised as recycling. These countries often lack the infrastructure to build a safe, sealed landfill, so much of this waste ends up in open fields, rivers, or even being burned, harming both people and the environment. There have been entire villages and communities formed around sorting through it by hand. This is very dangerous, unsanitary, and deeply unfair. Yet, it becomes the only source of income for many of these families living near these sites. This is a clear example of waste colonialism and injustice, an issue that we need to hold our governments accountable for, and as individuals, we should start by reducing the amount of waste we generate on a daily basis so that less goes to landfill and less needs to be exported abroad. So, next time you're buying something, think about how long it will stay on the planet once you're gone. Will it outlive you? If you found this video helpful, check out my previous videos on how recycling works. And if you want to make a small impact, start with your green bin, because every banana peel and coffee ground that you compost, that keeps methane out of the environment and moves us one step away from landfills. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.